All right, welcome back everyone to Mandy School of Art. So for today's Inktober challenge, we're looking at a dagger. So I thought that I would take this moment to show you how to do a transition from pure black to white, but this time we're going to do it with stippling. We often use hatching and cross hatching when we start working with ink because it's pretty straightforward and it's a lot quicker, but stippling can be done if you have the patience, can give you a very, very effective result. So the first thing that I did was create my pencil drawing of what I wanted to do. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the basic outlines. Now, I am going to be switching over to my pen and ink set, but if you don't have a pen and ink set at home, you can do it with markers. As you start doing your line work, start thinking right away about where the light's going to come from. And then go ahead and start varying some of the weights. Remember that the thicker lines represent where the shadows are going to be. Thin lines or broken lines will represent where the highlights are going to be. And then we're going to use the stippling technique to transition. So like here, for example, I know that there's going to be a shadow here, but then we got a transition. Or here, since the light's going to come from the top, we know that these lines are going to be much thinner. So let me switch over to my other pen, and then I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because this video is really about how to transition from black to white, not really about the line work. All right, once you have your line work done, then you're going to want to go ahead and put in some of your deeper shadows. And I'm going to use the brush. But again, if you don't have this system at home, this setup at home, you can use different sizes of markers. Okay. So I've already started some of this, but you can see like here, I know that this is going to be a shadow underneath this, and it's going to be on the stem. Think about cross contours. If the light's coming from the front, this area right here will be in highlight. And then as it goes under the pumpkin, then it's going to start to get a little darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start putting in my deepest shadows. And you're going to notice that when I do this, I follow the cross contours. So like my brush strokes are mimicking the direction of the cross contours. And I'm going to estimate more or less where to stop because I'm going to be transitioning with the stippling technique. All of this down here will be very dark. I'm going to go around the leaf. Then this piece here, part of it is going in this direction. And then on this side, it'll start going in this direction. That's pretty much what the cross contours are telling me. And again, I will transition this a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to pick little areas. So like here, for example, I'm going to go up. Now I need to leave a real thin slither of white there for the reflective light, right? Another slither of white right there. Okay. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the brush work. I'm going to like figure out where some of the lines need to be a little thicker to indicate shadows. And then also any large areas that I want to shade, I'll do that with the brush. And then we'll begin with the stippling. All right, so I think we are ready to start working on the stippling. Now, stippling is super easy to control, but it does take a very, very long time to do. So I'm gonna start this and kind of show you what I'm doing, and then I'll do time lapse and go through the end. So just like before, when you are stippling, you still have to think about cross contours. So like, for example, when I'm doing these lobes on the pumpkin, if the light source is here, then I know this area here going this way will start to get a little darker. The highlight would actually be right about here, and then it's going to transition this way. So it's going to eventually get dark. So we're going to go from light to medium to dark. Okay, so if you need to, you can do what I'm doing right now, and that is mapping it with a pencil, right? Now, when you get to this side, because of this bump right here, this highlight is going to look a little bit different right here. And the highlights on the other side probably won't be much at all. In fact, it probably won't be any highlights back there. So all of this will have to transition, and there's also going to have to be a shadow underneath the knife. Now, because the pumpkin has bumps in it, the shadow from the knife will also have to follow the cross contours. So it'll actually do something like this. It won't be straight. Okay, so that was a good mistake to make. Okay, here the highlight on this thing, because there's a raised area, will probably be right about here. So we'll have to transition in this direction and a little bit in this direction as well. Okay. When you do the vines, you got to think of the vines as cylinders. So remember, like if you remember from our cross contour unit, you have cross contours going in this direction if they're going perpendicular to the cylinder. But if they're coming this way, then they're almost parallel. They're going to come bigger as they come towards you and smaller as they go away from you. So if you need to map it out, you can do that. I'm comfortable doing it without the mapping, but I wanted to show you that. Okay. Now, just like before, I'm gonna start you off with this. This is it's a number 8 micron, but I'm actually gonna do mine with the nibs. So when you're doing this, I usually start off kind of light. And when I say light, I mean putting the dots far apart, because you can always add more dots. Anywhere where I want the area to stay light, I'm gonna leave it blank. As I come down, I simply put the dots closer together. Now with the micron, if you want slightly bigger dots, just hold it in place a little longer and a little bit of more ink will flow, and it'll give you slightly bigger dots. If you want the dots to be really small, you barely touch, right? So you do have some control over this if you do the microns. And of course, they come in different sizes, different tip sizes, so you can always switch from the big ones to the small one. It's up to you. Now, the important part is this. Right here, where you transition, you really want to get right on top of those black lines. So, but you're not like filling it in. If you don't, then you're gonna leave all of those patterns that were left behind by the brush. And that could be okay, you know, if you like that. But I find that when I really get in here and go over this, then it makes for a smoother transition. And when you're doing this right on top of the brushwork, it's okay for the dots to be overlapping each other. But then as you start to go away, make sure that you're starting to put them, start spacing them a little bit. The other thing you want to make sure of is that you're doing this with totally random dots. One of the things that I see my students do sometimes is they'll start doing this. And they'll start creating patterns, and then it takes away from the effect. So when you are doing this, try to keep this nice and random. Okay? Now, I'm going to be switching over to the nib, just because I like working with the same kind of ink that I use for the brush. And this is similar to the EF1, but if you look at it, let's see if I can see this up here. The tip on this is actually bent upwards a little bit, so that when you are creating dots, you can actually get slightly bigger dots than this one right here, which is the one that I typically use when I do line work. This one does not have a bent tip, so you can get much finer nib or dots. So I'm gonna go with this. I'm gonna start with this one, but if I really need small ones, I can go here. So I'm going to do a little bit of this for you so you can see what I'm doing, and then I'll speed up through the rest. So I'm going to finish this lobe right here, and then I'll do a little bit of one of the vines, and then I'll show you how I'm going to deal with the dagger. So all I did was load it, and the neat thing about this is that you can create a lot of different size dots really easily. Right? If I press a little bit harder, the dots get a little bit bigger. And then as I can either soften the pressure to make them smaller, or as the ink starts to run out, you can get some really small dots. So it's a nice little tool to have. You can see the size of the dots with this one, and then I'll show you the other one so you could see, hopefully see a comparison. And unfortunately, this tip here came with the set, and it doesn't have a number on it. So I have no idea what size tip it is. But it's similar in shape to the 502 that I use, but the tip is bent, and that was bent by the manufacturer on purpose. So I'll show you this one here. So when I press here, you can see that these dots are pretty big. They're almost like little ovals. But when I switch over to the 502, because it's got a much finer tip, you can see that the dots are much smaller and a little bit more consistent. Okay, you can squeeze a little bit harder to make bigger dots, but it's not nowhere near as easy as working with this one. So it's a matter of choice. These tips are pretty cheap, pretty inexpensive. So I usually have quite a few of them lying around. So, all right, so I'm going to continue with this, and then we'll do a little bit of the vine. So right here, I don't like this transition, so I'm just going to go ahead and add some more. That's a nice thing about working with dots, is that you can always add more. Can't take them away, but you can add more. So if there's something that you don't like, if it's not dark enough, or if the spacing of the dots looks too uniform, you can always go back and add to your liking. The most obvious disadvantage is that it takes a long time to do that. And I forgot to do this little area with the brush here, so switch over to the brush for a second. This needs to be consistent. Leaving a little bit of the white there. Okay, so while that's drying, I'm going to work on this vine up here, so I'm going to turn this way. And the big thing is, like you can see with the cross contours, that right about here, this is going to stay pretty dark. And then it's going to start to get light. This area here will be light, and then it goes back to a medium here. So the cross contours, are not just for drawing. It helps you figure out like other stuff, like how to do the shadows or how the shadows are going to bend. And if I was doing colors, it would do the same thing. It would actually help me figure out when do I need to change the values of the colors. Okay, so here's my line. So now I'm going to start putting these further apart, again, keeping them random, leaving some pockets of pure white. And then on this side, not as dark as that side, so I'm actually going to let that dry a little bit and then add some more dots. That way it doesn't smear too much, which is not a big deal when you're doing a really dark area, if the dots smear a little bit. But I like to, when I do this, I really want to show the texture of the dots, but there you saw like a little smearing there, and that's okay. So back to this side. Now it looks a little strange right now because this ink back here is already dry, and the ink that I'm putting on right now obviously is wet, so it looks shiny. But when all of this is nice and dry, it'll really blend very nicely. Okay. So you can see now this here, right? I got to transition out. So the highlight for this one is probably going to be like in this general area here. So it's going to be shadow, highlight, shadow. Okay. So, and I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm going to go through and basically work every section of this pumpkin, and I'm really thinking about how the light is going around the contours of the pumpkin and the vines and the leaf, and then just working my way through. Remember, keep everything loose. You don't want to start creating patterns. So, and take your time. Put on some music or something and put on the headphones and just go for it. It does take a while. I'm not gonna lie to you. It does take a while. But the effects are very different than when you're doing this with hatching or cross hatching. So, all right. I'm gonna keep going, and then we'll come back in a little while and then show you a little bit of work on the dagger. All right, so we're almost done with the main part. So a couple of things. Make sure that when you are doing the dots close to the lines, especially where the shadows are going to be, you got to make sure that you hit the line. Otherwise, it'll look like you're trying to color inside of the line. And that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to transition from a black line to a white area using stippling. Okay. So you'll notice that I've been using this pencil, and the reason is when you're doing this, especially if you're working with a nib, the tip tends to want to grab the paper and lift it. So I just use an eraser to press down on it, so it keeps the paper from lifting. So, and you'll notice, like in some areas, I actually let the ink overlap quite a bit. That's where I want some like deep shadows to look, but without just a line. So that's kind of why I do that, so that it looks like there's just a bunch of dots there, and I break that line up quite a bit. In the highlight areas, I don't mind leaving some areas of pure white. And remember, because the light's coming from the front, the highlight is not going to be on this edge. It's going to be more, not quite center, but just a little off center. So when I do the dots on this side, I'm still taking them all the way up to that black line, but they're going to be spaced more. And that moves the highlight a little bit into the cylinder. And yes, I know it's a vine, but if I think of them as cylinders and boxes and prisms and the other forms, the ellipses and the spheres, it actually helps me figure out how to shade them properly. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna let this dry for a second, and then we're gonna do a little bit of work on the dagger. All right, so here's what we got so far. So I'm gonna show you a little bit how I would do the blade, and then the handle is pretty much done the same way as the vines, because these are little cylinders also. So I'll show you how to do this part right here, and then we'll wrap this one up. So I took a moment and kind of drew in some pencil lines where I wanted some of the shadows to be, and I wanted them to be nice and straight. So the easiest way to do that with the nib is to use a scrap piece of paper and use it as a ruler. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my smaller nib because the other one was clogging up a lot. So this side here, I'm gonna go right up to that edge there, and I'm just going to start putting this side here really fairly dark, because if you want something to look shiny, you got to create some pretty strong contrast. So I'm gonna go ahead and make this area right here pretty dark. And I'm gonna speed through this part here a little bit because it does take a little while, especially now that I switched to this finer nib. But I wanna keep this stippling effect, so I don't wanna do this with a brush. So really nice and dark. I'm gonna leave just a slither down here. I'm gonna leave that little slither there to act kind of like a reflective light. Okay, so I will be back here in a minute. All right, so that's all nice and dry. So now I'm gonna do this little slither right here. So again, using the paper as a ruler, I'm gonna place it there, hold it. And again, that's gonna be a relatively dark area, so I'm gonna put the dots fairly close together. And I'm trying not to move the paper when I do this. Oops, almost went on the wrong thing. And then I can start filling in the rest of the area. Now this line here, I don't know if it's on the video or not, but I did that with micron and a ruler. I don't excuse me, I don't like to use the nib pens when I work with a ruler. And then after all this is done, then you still have to edit, right? So we'll see what it looks like. Erase the pencil lines. And then if there's anything else that we need to darken, we can darken them. If by chance I need to add white, I can add some white using a gel pen or white ink, but I'm hoping that I don't have to. All right, so that's pretty good there. And then we have this little edge here, and that's small enough, so I can do a freehand. And here I'm trying to kind of like suggest some of the little triangles. Okay, now while that's drying, I feel like this edge, this underneath here, I feel like there needs to be pure dark. Oops, I made it the wrong way. Should curve this way. Keeping that nice straight edge. And then I can transition out. It just felt like there was too many dots there. It didn't feel right. So, and that all comes with the editing part. But now I can go back and start putting in a mid-tone here by putting the dots fairly close together, because there shouldn't be this bright of a highlight here, in my opinion. So that deep dark shadow becomes even more important. Okay. Now, we still got to let this dry a little bit because I have a little bit more work to do here. So while that's drying, I'm going to work on the handle. And the handle is pretty much done the same way so as the vines. So you have your cross contours are going this way, but they're also going this way. So I think I'm going to focus on the ones that are going this way more, though. I think I'll get the biggest impact if I do it that way. So I'm just going to do a little bit while I wait for that to dry. Then we'll finish up the little handle. All right, so this looks like it's just about dry, so I can go back to my paper. And this time I got to leave a little gap there. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to hold it firm. And I don't need a ton here. So I'll start off with one row and then see if I need to add more. Because once that first row is done, then you can remove the paper and see what's going on. But we've got to get that contrast between the white area and the dark area. Yeah. And then like right here, we got some more of those same kind of triangular looking things. And then just a little bit darker, a little bit more. All right, so this is pretty much how you transition from pure black to pure white with stippling. The big thing is, number one is kind of make sure that you're always keeping in mind where the light source is going to be. Second, you want to follow your cross contours. So if it's curving, it should curve. If it's straight, like a sharp edge, then it should be straight. And of course, make sure you're breaking up that line where the brushwork and the stippling meet so that it looks natural, like it's a natural transition. Okay. So all I'm doing now is just to finish this up, I'm doing a little bit of editing. And then I'm going to remove the pencil lines and then give it a really good look and see if it's anything that I need to change. So hope you like this video. This is, it's actually a pretty easy way of transitioning from light to dark, but it's by far the most tedious of the ones that I've shown you. So if you have patience, then this will work really nice for you. And you get some nice, interesting textures. But if you don't have the patience, this will drive you kind of crazy. So you might try one of the other techniques instead. All right, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.